Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our panel, our second panel here. I'm going to start off by introducing myself, and everyone else can introduce themselves. My name is Jeremiah Shamus. I'm a vice president at Colliers International. I specialize with a team of 5, along with selling buildings and land in the Toronto area. We specialize in the middle market, so in the non-institutional space in Toronto and downtown Hamilton. So with that, Uzo, go ahead.
Hey, my name is Uzo Calderero. I am the founder and owner of Scaf-Tech Inc. We are recognized as a subcontractor for contractors and developers who are in new construction and as well as restoration activities throughout the city of Toronto.
Hey everyone. Zeifmans asked me to be here today, and it's a pleasure. I'm Tom Kirchmar. I am director and principal of Kirchmar Surveyors. We, as land surveyors, work with the largest clients and the largest developers in Toronto. It's a pleasure to do so. Companies like Dream, Trump, Regis, Ritz-Carlton, the film studio, Port. We try to look after all the largest players in Toronto. So in that time, I started to touch a little development, and in the last 10 years, I said that I could do what they can do, and so I started doing that myself. So I've started to become a medium-sized developer through this time, looking to get into the larger size. So I hear you, and I'll try to answer your question as we go through. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name's Jamie Grossman. Really happy to be here. My organization and what I've been doing for the last 21 years is advocating for tenants and occupiers of space. So my day-to-day life is helping organizations determine what to do with their real estate strategies, how to find space, and then design and construct that space, really bringing life to their organization. So I'm going to be talking from the occupier perspective today and talk about how the users of space actually bring value to the developer and buildings.
Good evening, everyone. Garth Dingwall. I'm a partner at Abrahams LLP, and Majir was on panel 1. He's also at my firm. So I won't repeat what our firm does. What I do is I'm primarily in dispute resolution, as we call it, or litigation. So you might wonder, in the context of construction law, what I would add to the sort of panel, and what I hope to add is really how you might be able to avoid litigation. It's not always possible, of course, or that you might be able to lessen the risk, mitigate the risk, or put yourself in a better situation if it does end up in that eventuality. I think there was a statistic I just saw previously that they say about 30% of construction projects end up in a dispute at some point, which is not it's obviously, it can be a very lucrative industry, a very interesting industry, but that can be an important aspect of risk mitigation and maximizing profitability. So with that aside, that's what I'm looking to add to the panel, and thank you all for being here this evening.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. I want to start off, because I think we have a lot of young developers here, we have a lot of stakeholders, more senior developers as well, and a lot of perspectives here. Let's start off with a more general question, and maybe I'll start with you, Garth. What is the number one mistake that you find developers make in growing their business today?
I'd say, again, this is coming, of course, with my lawyer hat on and seeing matters as they come across my desk from a dispute standpoint. So I'd say the number one mistake there, it's hard to narrow down to number one mistake, probably when we're talking about emerging developers or sort of early stakeholders in the process who aren't as established, aren't as mature. Construction law can be a pretty complicated regime at first. I mean, it's designed to streamline disputes, and a lot of it makes sense when you really drill down into it, you hope eventually. But as an early company, it can be a challenge. You want to focus on the business aspect and doing good work, running a good business, but then you also need staff and a team that understand at least the basics of construction law, or at least know when they need to go and see a lawyer, or what they need to do in order to sort of safeguard their rights. Specifically, some things, for example, are lien rights. If you don't know what the timeframes are there, that can have a very drastic consequence on your business. And it can be a matter such as having your accounting department know that you can't, there's a point at which when you send reminder letters, for example, that you haven't been paid, that after, well, under the old act, it was, by the 44th day, you better make sure it's reached a lawyer's office or you lose your lien rights. Now it's 60 days. But basically empowering your team and allowing your team to know the fundamentals to safeguard your rights and instruct counsel.
All right, so it really seems like you need the right advisors surrounding you. So, Jamie, from the occupier standpoint, what do you think?
Well, from the occupier standpoint, I think one of the common mistakes is believing that the markets will never change, and how do you deal with vacancy? I think we've had a
0.4% downtown.
Yeah, we've had a pretty good run, and I think most landlords' memories are very, very short, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. I just think that when markets are really tight, I think that there's a lack of compassion, and I think landlords start to forget how complicated it actually is for organizations to make a decision to move or to change, and I think there is a tendency to forget who is the client in that relationship. I think that there is an unfortunate adversarial relationship that can exist in the commercial market between tenants and landlords, which is really unnecessary because most of the strongest deals are built where the landlord and the tenant actually are aligned and are helping each other. And I think tight markets really just don't lend to that, and that's a mistake.
All right, so it looks like long-term relationships mean a lot to you, and you think that to all the young developers out there, be careful with your tenants because you never know what will happen to the market. Careful.
Yeah, the better you treat them when things are really good for you as a developer, the more leniency you might get when it swings the other way. And again, I think that we're here talking about real estate, but almost every decision is actually made by a human being. And in many cases, especially commercial, the real estate itself serves the people who work in that space. And we just see a lot more real estate decisions being made based on a human resource-based decision versus a finance decision. Organizations are very focused on how they use their space to attract and retain talent, build and support their culture. So real estate is becoming as much about people as it's becoming about money today.
Excellent, thank you very much. So, Tom, I think you have a very interesting aspect because you've been both an advisor and a developer. And I first met you when we sold about 60 acres to Mattamy over in Waterdown. And
I remember that well. Years ago, I remember that well.
That was certainly a very complex deal, and your services were very much needed. So to you, being on both sides of the equation, being both a developer and an advisor, what do you find is one kind of high-level number one mistake they need to look out for when growing their business?
Development is a very, very interesting process, and as you start in development, you'll find that it's a roller coaster ride of good and bad. One day you'll have a plan to say that this is going to be perfect, and then the next day all that plan is shot and something else is going in a totally different direction. And you have to understand that there is a roller coaster ride that you have never seen before. It's a fun ride where at the end when you sell and you get Zeifmans to help you with the taxes so they don't take as many taxes as you think they take, that it's a real win. But all the way through that process, you have to use your brain, have to keep thinking and never give up. There's so many times when I just said to myself, I just can't believe that this is going to win. And I just didn't want to give up. And development is a roller coaster ride. Don't think anything else. Always believe that what you're going to go through is, I have to succeed. So being on the consultant side, I see these developers talking to me, and they just don't know what to do, and they just don't know where to go. They come to us as professional consultants to help them figure it out. But there's a side of me that is just, there's a wall that say, okay, let me help you, let me figure it out, let me do it. But they are crying on the other side of the phone because sometimes things are so complicated and so out of place that you didn't really think that the plan that you had is going where it's going to go and how it's going to succeed. These sort of pitfalls that come, you just have to get through them. The roller coaster ride, try to get through that middle side of it. It's not, you can't let the lows destroy you or the highs make it so that you've had every victory and you don't have to worry anymore. Those are my thoughts towards being a developer. I've been developing for about 12 years, large, small. They all have the same feel. So I'll get that back to your question for how to create and how to get larger somewhere further on.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Uzo, I think you might have a very interesting aspect.
Sure. I'm usually at the front lines in the trenches when it comes to the initial design and construction phase as a subcontractor. What I've recognized is that as we, for the last 12 years, and I've worked with major development companies throughout the city, that the attrition rate is rapid. You know, there's a significant amount of poaching, and I'll explain. Right now, the biggest challenges I see is the acquiring of talent, and that goes on both sides, from the developer end to hire the proper construction manager and even the estimator. And even on the contractor or subcontractor side, you know, right now we're forced to pay our workers more, and we have to wait for availability when talent arrives. And that obviously has an increased cost across the board because, you know, construction managers I've spoken recently have seen this as a daily event, the lack of available crews. As consequently, it's led to an increase in construction costs and, more importantly, delays, right? So recognizing this, we try to help consult from the bottom up. We tell them these are the pitfalls, this is what you should be braced for, these are the sort of solutions that you can do to avoid delay penalties, and we work with them to come up with solutions, almost as a guide, as a subcontractor to the developer to say, hey, we have some solutions that have worked in the past, and overall the benefit is loyalty, a good relationship, and saving both time and cost.
Well said. You know, having a good consultant that can take you through that, and because they've seen it before, is a crucial part of making sure the development goes well. Well said. Well said.
Yeah, that's actually a very good point you bring up. So construction prices have been rising pretty significantly. I think everyone in the room can agree with that. You know, our pro formas are changing pretty much month to month. And one thing we're finding is that there is not really a consensus on where hard costs and soft costs are. And it's not really until you get into the actual trades and get the contracts out, you're finding where the prices are. Maybe both of you actually could come and comment a little bit more on how to control those costs, because I think this is one very key lesson to the new developers out there. Market risk and timing is one of the most significant aspects. And you don't want to be at the aspect where you have to come to us and, oh, I have to sell this because I can't finish it. I'm overdone on my budget, right? So, you know, this timing aspect is so important. And maybe you could touch upon that, Tom, actually, because you've developed projects and you've had to stay on time from survey on Crickmar until all the way forward.
Yeah, you know, I may be the wrong one only because my last project went way over budget, and everybody will be like, well, is that possible? Yeah, it's absolutely possible. It's how to control costs is it, and you won't believe it, but hire the most expensive professionals, the most expensive consultants, because when they charge
For commission
you,
too, right?
right,
So, yeah.
that will be me. But sorry, but in all truth, it's you hire someone and you have the most expensive. You believe that it's the most expensive, but when you hear from a consultant, wow, I've never seen that before, that's the wrong guy. The guys that have seen it all are the ones that know what's coming and always fix it. The consultants that are the best are the ones you never hear from. The ones that are just working in the background, nothing goes wrong, and then the project gets done and you're like, oh, he didn't do very much. He did everything. You just didn't see it all happening. Those are the guys that you want to hire. And I'm not saying that it's always me, but
Most of the time.
but Kirchmar specializes in making sure, as a land surveyor, which is a crucial part of development, that all the pitfalls that consultants can't see because they just didn't see it coming, good consultants will always see it coming. That's my suggestion to all of you.
Very well said, actually. The project that we were on was an extremely complex.
Right, it was.
There was 60 acres, but part of it was serviced, part of it was raw land,
Right.
part of it was built.
Right.
And I mean, you definitely worked seamlessly.
Thank you. I appreciate that. You know, it wasn't just me. You look at me, but I have 10 land surveyors in my office. When you hire a larger company, then they can work off of each other as well and understand one can call on another. So in my office, I have over 200 years of experience, whereas somebody has only one surveyor or one engineer or one architect only has that many years of experience. When you take a larger company, like a larger real estate company or a larger architectural company, they can have 200 or 300 years of experience that you're drawing on when one person can talk to everybody else. That's why I would be looking at larger firms as well.
Absolutely. So maybe you could continue on that, Uzo, just construction costs and timing, so critical.
Sure.
How do you control
a lot
that?
of things you said, Tom, I can really resonate with, and I'm completely aligned with. When it comes down to reducing construction costs, I'll just say that we're not a large company, we're not a small company, but we are a company that's flexible and hungry, and we work with medium-sized and large developers to address their requirements. And their requirement is really getting the job done and on time. So how do you do that? You need to get your best team out there. It's almost like having your SWAT team. So I decided as part of my model to put an elite crew to ensure the job gets done. That way, it stays within time and budget, and we can move on to the next thing. A lot of other companies may use junior crews that are not experienced simply because they want a greater margin. That doesn't really bode well for the long-term game, right?
Do you have then consultants who are working with the developer day in, day out to
Right.
watch when the contracts come in, make sure they get time
Absolutely.
specifically?
So we actually work at head office. We work at the estimating team. We actually serve as consultants, say, look, we've seen this in the past. We know the task dependencies, and we can mitigate risk because, just as Tom said, we know what's down the line.
So you're
Now, we don't have a
planning
crystal ball, but
proactively then, in a
yeah,
sense.
we play proactively.
Yeah.
We work as a consultant with them. And in areas where, our scaffolding business is not only in development of condominiums, but in all aspects, all industries, restoration and even pharmaceutical. So having a myriad of skills and knowledge base across multiple industries really helps us advise the appropriate developer, general contractor, within their wheelhouse of what they require.
Okay, great. Thank you. So this next question is for Garth specifically, but last year in 2019, there was $2.98 billion in residential land sales, particularly in Toronto and the 5 boroughs outside is about 233 sales, so pretty good. We were just about 6% off 2017 highs. Everyone remembers those good times. I think we're going back there, but what recent trends have you seen going into 2020 in your field, which is really construction stage, the litigation stage, that you see that young developers should be aware of? So where should they think and concentrate their efforts rather in 2020?
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good issue to look at here, especially because there's been a lot of change. Just in terms of the legislation alone, it's changed from, it was previously the Construction Lien Act, and now it's the Construction Act. I know they just dropped one word from the legislation, but there's actually been a whole slew of changes that have ensued. So one of the main things, and it goes back to the point I was talking about before, is knowing your rights and obligations, because it can have such a massive impact. Just things like lien rights, for example. Under the Construction Lien Act, this changed in July of 2018, but you used to have 45 days from the last day that you were there supplying work, for example, to the site or CSP. But now that's changed to 60, and then the time frames also. So you have a little bit of a longer time frame to work with. The bigger change, though, I think that's going to be of more interest to developers is probably has to do with the flow of funds in the construction pyramid. There is always a need for speed in construction projects, and I mean, the others can speak to that a lot more intelligently than I can in terms of the business and profitability aspects of that. But when we're looking at the flow of funds, the Construction Act just a couple months ago had some major changes to it that just became law. So there's now the prompt payment regime as of October 1st, 2019, and also adjudication. So it's early to say what that means, but emerging developers and all stakeholders in the industry really should be attuned to that. I'm going to speak probably a little bit more about that further, but for example, when you render an invoice, there's now basically 28 days to pay that invoice or to issue, or you have to, within 14 days, issue a notice of dispute with respect to the invoice. So a lot of the disputes that come across my desk, sometimes, you know, there may be no issue with the work being done, or maybe there is, but you know, you can't sit on a pile of 6 invoices, for example, if you're a developer, and not respond to them, because now you're deemed to admit those invoices or not take issue with that unless you've issued a notice. So the prompt payment, they started that sort of in the UK, and it's apparently been successful there so far. It remains to be seen what will happen. If it does improve sort of the flow of funds and this, you know, the resolution of disputes, then that would be a good thing, but it's still very, very early days yet.
Oh, so that's good. So again, we're back to timing. Very important, as always. So, Jamie, I guess an interesting point then for you is that you're on the occupier side, and you're really at the end game for the developers. So they're looking, whether it's condo or you're renting something out, when it comes to the commercial side, you're doing all the build out. So what are the trends you're seeing coming into 2020, especially in this low vacancy market?
Yeah, so many of the same trends that we've talked about here, or challenges for the developer, are challenges for the user and the occupier. At some point, the space is going to be handed over to them, and they're going to be required to do their build out, and they're going to be required to furnish the space and put the technology there, and the cost of that has risen dramatically. And I think the biggest challenge that occupiers have is the cost justification of making a move or building out your space is usually a 10 to 15 year type of decision. And when we think about that in the context of design and planning, I ask my clients all the time, based on the average age of new worker who comes into your workspace, how old are they now relative to when they're going to join you at the end of your lease? And on average, we are designing and building space right now for kids who are in high school. Right? If you think about it, most people who move into a commercial space will probably still occupy that space 10 to 15 years from now.
What, is that millennials, or that's a new name we don't even know about yet?
There'll be a new name. There is a name, but and with that, it's interesting when we think about what's important to each of these different generations in the workspace. I'm a firm believer that generations don't have as big an impact on what workers are looking for. However, there are some changes. Our design group, SDI, recently completed a study where we looked at the hierarchy of most important attributes that users are looking for in space. And number one was power. The number one concern of a millennial or a Gen Y in the workplace today is, will I have enough power to keep my devices going, and will I have enough Wi-Fi to be online? And so this is a huge trend, and we're also seeing this when I've been on panels with other residential developers. They've said the number one thing that we're looking at is free Wi-Fi. How do we look and be technology ready for the future?
And the pet stuff. They like to have, to be able to clean their pets at the pet spas at the bottom of the condo.
Electrical
that's
outlets.
the new trend as well, if you were looking for trends.
So put electrical outlets everywhere, developers.
Well, you have to be thinking about the future, but a lot of the old things that were important are still important today. Natural light, good fresh air, wellness is more important. People are are thinking about things that where maybe the softer issues before are really at the forefront in terms of thinking about how does my space or development compete with other developments later on. So that would be my message to the developers. Two things. One is think about the flexibility of your space for the future. And the second is don't spend good money on your construction that the user is then going to ask you to tear out. Great example, multi-floor tenants. If you get them in early, you can decide how you build a multi-interconnecting stairwell before you lay the concrete that you're then going to have to remove. So involve them in the process, and then everybody saves a little bit of money.
Again, back to that proactive planning, right? And timing. So another question I have over here is for you two. You've both built very successful brands, and your brands are quite specialized in what they do. So this is probably something that developers aren't thinking about so much as, because first and foremost, they're looking to get the deal in order to start. But what would be your advice for a developer looking to build a standout brand? And I'm sure you can think of that one developer you think their brand is quite good. Maybe you could touch upon how you think they can brand themselves and actually create a specialization in their field.
Do you want to take that first?
Sure, I'll give it a shot. So what I see with some developers is one of the offerings we have is actually just having their logo and their name on the construction site. When you drive around the city, you'll see a lot of plywood. It's bland, it's gray. There's not really a lot of vision, but there's specialized equipment that we would actually recommend that they do to place not only the development, the future development, the image, the vision of it, but also their name. And that can be applied very easily throughout the construction site. I know it sounds very simple and self-evident, but I think as a young developer, having your name out there and even promoting yourself that way would go a long way. Just a couple of thoughts that I've seen other developers do. Right? Here's an example. Eastern Construction has a beautiful sign at all their development projects. It's obvious and it's apparent, and it's something that can be easily done at very little cost, and as well serve a functional component. At the end of the day, when you dig a hole in the ground, you have to protect people from falling into that hole. You might as well just put a really nice, beautiful fascia, or what we call it, hoarding, with the site, the entire plan, and your name around it.
Tom.
So branding. So we have specialized in branding at Kirchmar, where we actually put signs up on every construction sites that we have.
Literally everywhere. I think we know that.
So we have pushed that envelope as far as we can. I don't think that we can push it further than we have now, unless we go to billboards. But branding is about being good at what you do. So you can have whatever brand you want, but the moment that people start talking badly about your brand, it's pointless. You could have spent millions and millions on a brand that's not going anywhere. So start good, start strong, be good at what you do, and then your brand will go out by itself. It will create itself. So that's what happened to us. We've been in business for 35 years. My father started the business, and he always tried to be as strong as he possibly could, as reputable as he could, and that's why our brand is as strong as it is. So start good, and your brand will always be strong. That's my view on that.
Anything to add?
I think brand and culture are all about the people that we hire to work within our organizations. And I think that you can have a desire to create a brand, but you need to foster a culture that effectively supports exactly what you've said. The brand is what people are going to say about you versus what you want to say about you. So
True.
Spending your time with your people, and I would say be very disciplined, because not everybody that any of us in the consulting industry will hire, we strive to hire all the right people. And we think we do a great job, but if you really want to build a strong brand and culture, you have to be really good at recognizing when somebody doesn't fit and making the hard move from leadership, which is to ask them to leave and replace them with people who really are the type of people that you want to embody your culture.
Agreed.
Well, thank you. I think there's a number of themes that are emerging here, but timing, hiring the right people, proactive planning, right? And I think, Garth, I think this is a good question for you. So how can disputes be decided efficiently so that the parties can turn their attention back to completion, right? So the project's on time.
Right. No, and that's always a key question when a file comes to my desk. But even hopefully before that even happens, I think it goes back, not to harp on this point, but having it, because everyone's almost said it, is having a good team. That's very important. Having regular communication with the right members of the team, for example, a good project manager who's in regular contact, that doesn't guarantee, obviously, staving off disputes, but it can certainly lessen or mitigate their impact. Having regular progress meetings, getting to the forefront of conversations that might not be pleasant conversations to have, but nip them in the bud early on. And again, you're not guaranteeing that you'll avoid it, but issues such as delay can be addressed. If there are issues with cost, get them out in the open. Now, of course, still a lot of matters may still find their way to disputes, and when that happens, I think there's the traditional litigation route. What I think is going to be especially interesting this year, and I hope will resolve matters more quickly, will be adjudication. That's the other part of the prompt payment, the changes to the act I was mentioning before. Adjudication is basically, it's just the fancy word for a mandatory arbitration, really. The parties, it's supposed to happen very fast, which has some appeal, rather than it go to the lawyers and someone issues a statement of claim and puts a lien on title and it takes months to resolve, might get bonded off, go into court, all that stuff. And that's not to say that liens still won't be relevant. They certainly will, but adjudication, if you have a dispute about an invoice, you can, the party who wants to get paid can refer it to adjudication, issue a notice. Within 4 days, if you don't have an adjudicator from the other side agreed upon, because that's often a sticking point in arbitration, people can't even agree on the arbitrator, they force you under the new act that if you don't agree on an arbitrator or adjudicator, that there is a regulatory body now that will just simply appoint one for you. And then from there, once you send them the documents, which is there's a set time frame for that. It's only about a week. Then the arbitrator or the adjudicator has 30 days to render a decision. So if that all plays out as it needs to and as the act requires, that has a lot of promise for resolving disputes more quickly. But again, we're on sort of new territory there with that because a lot of the contracts that this applies to have to have been entered into before October 1st, 2019, or procurement has to have commenced then. So we'll start to see a lot more, dealing with this new area, and I think it will make disputes amenable to being resolved more quickly, but we'll see.
All right, so thank you very much. I think that if we ever need to hire you, we'll know who to go to. So with that, I think that concludes the panel. With that said, any other questions? No, all right. That means we won.
I think so too, right?